I was so damn depressed. I don't even want to talk about this. I'm gonna need you to go. It was giving Where Was the Editor? I hated it. This book really pissed me the fuck off. It's giving 1 star. How does one read horror after this? These characters were flatter than my ass. Greetings, mortals! Today we are giving you one of your most asked for videos, which is books that put me in a reading slump. I did a video that features skits from myself and my dog, and the video talked about creative ways to escape a reading slump. Now, ways to escape a reading slump videos are all over BookTube, and they have been a BookTube staple for many years. But I was constantly seeing the same tips recommended over and over again, and so in that video I decided to share some ways, some tips and tricks and hacks that I use in my everyday life to get me out of reading slumps when I inevitably find myself in one. And in that video, I just made an off-the-cuff comment saying, hey, if you guys like this video, maybe I'll do one where I talk about books that put me into a reading slump. And y'all were like,
give us the fucking video.
Like, all right, damn. So because I want my channel to continue and because I do not want to open my door and find an angry mob of book nerds there, I mean, honestly, what are y'all gonna do? Throw pages at me? I am here recommending this video. So that original video is going to be linked down below. Definitely check it out, especially if you are a fan of my Belgian Shepherd, Akasha. Now, I am annoyed with myself because I originally had 5 books that I was going to talk about in this video. It was going to be a quick, cursory little video, a cute, quirky thing. And as I sat down to film, I was like, you know what, let me just see if there's any books that I have missed. I ended up with a stack of 14 books. I kept seeing books where I was like, oh my god, that put me in a slump, and oh my god, this one did, and that one too. And I just literally could not fucking help myself. So you're going to see more books than was originally planned, and in this video I'm going to be alternating between good books and bad books. And of course, good and bad are respective titles, right? I don't want to make it seem like my word is the law. Alright, and I think that's everything. Without further preamble, let's talk about some books that put me into a reading slump, and also, oh my god, not me saying that I was done introducing and still going on. And also those tips that I gave y'all in that how to get out of a reading slump video are ones that I use for each and every single one of these books. Why am I dressed like Crocodile Dundee? It's giving Indiana Jones, and what's with the hand on the hip? So I'm just trying to say I'm walking my own talk here. The first book I'm going to talk about in this video is The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. Now, I've talked about this a few times as a book that shocked the pants off of me, because if you follow my channel, you know that I'm a big fan of horror and thrillers, but not zombies. The zombie reanimated corpse trope is so played out for me, even though the mythos, the origin of this trope being in Haitian mythology and lore, is actually super sick. That being said, the way that zombies are depicted in Western mythos just does absolutely nothing for me. Ignore the plane that's flying ahead. I'm not flying the motherfucker. That being said, so long story short, I went into The Girl with All the Gifts not expecting to love it. I got it for pretty cheap on thrift books, and holy shit. In The Girl with All the Gifts, we are following a little girl named Melanie who is in this compound where children like her are kept under lock and key. They are always handled very carefully with restraints. They are never allowed to come into contact with human flesh, and they always have a muzzle on their mouths. And as the story unfolds, you come to find out that these children are basically zombies. I'm just going to call them zombies. That's actually not what they are, but the reveal on why people turn to eating human flesh, the reveal of that was so phenomenal that I do not want to spoil it for you. That reveal itself was a part of the reason why this book became a favorite. The gore and the horror in this book is absolutely delicious, but it's not even just that. It is the fact that the storytelling itself, the pacing, and the characters that we are following are unputdownable. It was impossible for me to look away. You get to follow this very corrupt scientist who is trying to experiment on Melanie and children like her in order to end this epidemic. Has no qualms about torturing the shit out of these children and running the most violent experiments upon them. The purpose of her character as a whole serves to question, to save the world, would you torture children? We are also following the compassionate teacher who is teaching Melanie and the kids, as well as the army sergeant who is in charge of keeping these kids in line. We are following these characters that all have very different motivations, and of course shit hits the fan and they are all thrown outside of the safety of this compound into the actual wild where they have to fend for themselves. When I tell you that this book felt like it was actually happening as I read it, I truly and utterly mean it. It was turned into a fantastic adaptation, but still, it cannot hold a candle to the original source material. This book was whip smart. Its observations about humanity. Out of all of these amazing characters, my absolute favorite was Melanie herself. This little girl is brilliant. She's an absolute genius, but she is one of those characters who is also deeply compassionate, even though she's not exactly human. One of the issues that I often have with characters that are seen as very compassionate and empathic and characters that are seen as very intelligent is that those concepts are constantly separated. There is this idea in literature, in movies, etc., that you can be smart or you can be compassionate. And the fact that Melanie gets to be both really meant a lot to me as a reader. There is nothing flat about these characters. And the icing on the cake is that the action itself, the horror, the pacing, the suspense, the gore, it was all spot on. That is exactly why this book put me into a reading slump. How does one read horror after this? Following up with a thriller book that put me into a reading slump for the opposite reason, we have You by Carolyn Kepnes. Now, specifically not You, but the sequel to this book, which is called Us, Them, I don't fucking know what it's called. The sequel to You, while I loved this book, disappointed me. You is a series in which we are following a serial killer named Joe Goldberg, who becomes obsessed with women and basically charms his way into becoming their boyfriends while killing anybody who interferes. And this book is famously told in second person as he stalks this poor girl at a bookstore. I absolutely loved it. It was everything that I wanted in a thriller, especially with a serial killer protagonist. It makes the reader feel culpable for the things that Joe is doing and forces you to empathize with him, which is something that I really like because I absolutely adore psychological mind fucks. We are following him as he's doing these absolutely heinous things. Unfortunately, Carolyn Kepnes decided to throw all of that out of the window, and in the second book he has a fucking midlife crisis and sells all his shit and moves to Hollywood and decides to try and make it as a TV writer. It just became a comical mimicry of itself, and I just hated it. He starts to become obsessed with vanity and praise and attention, which is the absolute opposite of what a serial killer wants. And it just didn't make any sense for his character. I can handle a book that has trash characters, but if you are going to bore me on top of that, it's giving 1 star. Switching gears to a fantasy, this was one of my most highly anticipated fantasies of last year, and that is none other than Son of the Storm by Suyi Davies Okunbawa. I had the privilege of reading this book where we are following Danso, who is a scholar. He comes from a lower caste but has managed to fight his way into this academic institution that is very, very sought after. But he is used as a scapegoat and blamed for stealing a scroll that means a lot to some very powerful people. And so he is cast out from the school and decides to take it upon himself to locate who actually stole the scroll itself, and clear his name. And of course, he encounters dark, unspeakable magics along the way. The world that Suyi Davies Okunbawa created is one that you can feel on the tip of your tongue. It felt like a piece of candy was placed on my tongue and it was melting, and with the melting of that candy, the world was coming into focus. I know that sounds absolutely insane, but that's the only way I can describe this book. Danso, of course, is a cinnamon roll of a character. He is smart, analytical, and he's got a heart of gold. And this is another great example of a character that is smart, but still cares about others and is just whole, well-rounded. He also has been betrothed to this girl who is basically the villain of the story. Can never remember her name, but she is his opposite in every way a person can be opposite another. She is absolutely beautiful. She is memorizing. She is what? She is mesmerizing and manipulative and cunning, and she comes from a family that has a lot of power, and she knows how to manipulate her way into power herself. Beautiful writing and quotes that you're gonna want to write down, atmosphere for days, as well as characters that you just can't look away from. I read it damn near in one sitting. It definitely put me in a reading slump because I was like, I want a similar world. I want this book all over again. The way that people present their culture and customs were just so creative, leaning very heavily on traditions within West Africa. It is a book that is unlike others that are being pushed on the market, and I missed it so profoundly. Now let's talk about a book that I did not miss, and that was Astrid Sees All. This book is by Natalie Standiford, and I wanted to throw it and myself out of a window. In this book, we are following a girl who becomes absolutely obsessed with this beautiful young woman named Astrid. It is set in the 1980s amidst the glittering New York streets, and we're following them through drugs and sex and rock and roll and these dark nightclubs and all of that shit. I just remembered the best friend, her name is not Astrid, it's Carmen. Astrid is the alter ego that Phoebe creates for herself as she sheds the young, doe-eyed girl that she once was. This book really pissed me the fuck off. The book starts out with them having all this fun and adventure, and then they clearly realize that their lifestyle isn't sustainable and they fall into ruin. Constantly overdosing, they don't have food, they don't have money, they're struggling to survive, they're being hounded by men on the street. The thing that pissed me off about this book was that Astrid was so obsessed with Carmen for no reason. Carmen was so flat and basic of a character, and it is a book that is supposed to talk about female-female obsession with sapphic undertones, and I was not convinced. The writing did nothing for me, the atmosphere wasn't viable, but the icing on the shit cake was the fact that at any point in time, Astrid could have gone home. She could have gone back to her privileged community and gone back to being Phoebe. Her parents are constantly asking her to come home, and on principle, she keeps saying no. And the reason that she doesn't want to go home isn't because it was an abusive environment. It was because her home was too healthy. She felt stifled by her mother. She tells her mom, I'm gonna go into the city and make it on my own. And her mom's like, you're not gonna make it. And she's like, fuck yeah, I'm gonna make it. And then of course she can't make it. And because she is too proud to admit that she was wrong and ask for help, she goes through all of this unnecessary drama. And so even the reasons that she was suffering were so vapid that I couldn't root for her in any way, shape, or form. I did not like this book.
Okay, green eggs and ham, I do not like them, Sam, I am.
It was one of my most anticipated, and so when I finished it, I didn't want to read anything else because I was so astounded by the sheer amount of disappointment that I was experiencing. I was literally drowning in an ocean of sadness. I just still can't believe that this girl didn't simply go home. Now let's talk about a family that I do actually root for. This is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, and you will probably, potentially, maybe know if you follow me on Instagram that I read this book last year and I fell in love. This is a book that was not on my highly anticipated list. I didn't know anything about this book or even the author, but all I know is that I saw the cover, and when I saw this cover, I just had a feeling that this book was going to be special. Have you guys ever had that feeling where you look at a book and you just know it's going to mean the absolute world to you? That was the feeling that I got when I looked at this book. So this book is set in 1580, I believe, and we are following a dysfunctional family who has to react when the Black Plague touches their door. Hamnet himself is a twin. His mother, Agnes, has a really close relationship with her sibling, Bartholomew. And one of the things that this book did so incredibly well was it went back in time to when Agnes was a kid, living with Bartholomew and having to take care of him after a tragedy strikes her family, and falling in love with Hamnet's father. So we get to experience them as children, and then we get to see what's happening when they have children themselves, and their dynamic is very different. It shows the ways that a relationship can fall apart, and you felt it, you experienced it. This is a book that you should definitely read if you are going through a breakup or you want to feel what it's like to go through a breakup. There's also a really beautiful magical component to this story that is just woven in very seamlessly, even though it isn't a fantasy by any means. It is one of the most beautifully written books I have ever read. If you are a fan of poetic writing that you can find no fault in, quotes that you are going to want to memorize and mouth to yourself in the mirror, this book is for you. Maggie O'Farrell is an incredible author. Everything about it shimmers and is beautiful, and I loved these characters, even the imperfect ones. The reason that this put me in a reading slump was because every book that I tried to read after this meant nothing, because no writing compared after immediately finishing this book. Nothing compares. All I wanted was Maggie O'Farrell's writing all over again, and this is her book. It's her unique writing style, and since I couldn't find that, I just didn't want to read anything else. Such a Quiet Place by Megan Miranda is a perfect example as to why I hate commercial domestic thrillers. This trope of thrillers that are set in a small idyllic town that has secrets, basically set in a cul-de-sac, they just don't work for me. And this book is a prime example of why. We are following a young woman whose name is Harper Nash, and when she was younger, her best friend Ruby went to jail for murder. And the book kind of picks up with Ruby just appearing on Harper's doorstep with her bags right after she got out of prison, and it's like, what's up, homie? Harper is like, I don't want her here. I don't want you to stay. I'm gonna need you to go. And knows that Ruby is up to no good. And one of the questions throughout the book is, did Ruby actually kill this person or not? Ruby herself has always maintained her innocence, still maintains her innocence, and not only forces her way back into Harper's life, but back into the old friend group that they all used to have. And so you are seeing these friends now as adults, confronting all of the things that they have done and grappling with Ruby's presence as a whole. These characters were flatter than my ass. That's all I'm gonna say about that. The writing did absolutely nothing for me, and there was nothing scary about this book. The reason that this book pissed me off so much was for the simple fact that at no point in time could anybody show up and bully their way into my home. A lot of the things that Harper was experiencing just pissed me off because she didn't need to go through any of it. It just wasn't believable. Next up, we have Uzumaki by critically acclaimed Japanese manga horror artist Junji Ito. It is about a small town that becomes haunted by spirals, and there is so much body horror. Spirals start to appear on their bodies, and we are following students as they try and figure out what the hell is going on, unraveling the core of this mystery, and figuring out how to stop it. Now, the characters really do shine in this manga, and because it is so long, you get to really watch them suffer, but you also get kind of cameo stories from people in the town who are being infested by spirals themselves. There is insect horror, there is just so many different types of horror within this book, and that is something that Junji Ito is known so well for. And when I tell you that this is one of the few books that I've ever read in my life that actually scared me, that actually made me cringe, that actually made me feel icky, I really and truly mean it. I was not expecting this book to do anything for me, and usually when someone says that something is scary, I'm like, yeah, okay. And it is not because of them, it is because I am dead inside. This is a chunky tome, and when I finished it, I had to fight the urge to start it all over again. Have had that impulse maybe 3 times in my whole life where I finish the book immediately, I want to read it again. In every book that I picked up for my structured TBR for that month, I sat down and I would just meander and wander through the house like a freaking ghost because I kept thinking about the story. I would open a book and I would be thinking about this town. I would be thinking about spirals. I would be picturing spirals. I was so obsessed, and I feel like that was the point. He wanted people to be haunted by these spirals, and that feeling that the book is staying with you, that it's behind you, that it is following you with every step you take. It was with me for quite a while. For months I struggled to read other books, and I definitely couldn't read any horror books after this. It was a while before I could pick up another horror book because everything reminded me of this one. Nothing compares. was. Now we have another book that put me in a reading slump, and that is Like a Sister by Kelly Garrett. Now this is a book that I tentatively recommend because thematically I like a lot of things about it. This is a mystery thriller where we are following a young Black woman who is estranged from her family, and her younger sister, who is a musician, an R&B star, is found to have overdosed on heroin, and she's like, absolutely not, my sister would never. My sister would absolutely never touch heroin. She was afraid of needles. She goes out to find her sister's true killer. And unfortunately, this book just was a letdown because I had such high expectations for it and it just didn't meet them. But there were still so many things about it that I liked, and I still encourage people to read it. Now, the problem was that I was reading this for, I think it was Blackathon, where I was hosting Team Thriller.
Why is my face shining brighter than a diamond?
And it actually made it really difficult to pick up other books that I was reading for Blackathon because I was like, am I missing something?
Besides a father?
Why isn't this book sticking with me? I was looking forward to it so hard, and I was worried that the other books were going to let me down the way that this one did. And again, it's not a bad book. It just left me kind of feeling oddly empty. Does this make sense? I don't even know how to describe how it put me in a slump. It made me actually DNF another book that I was reading for Blackathon because I was then looking at all the other thrillers that I was reading under a microscope. And thankfully it was, I think, The Violin Conspiracy that pulled me out of that slump. Definitely would not recommend this one if you are trying to get out of a reading slump. Now, if you need fast-paced books that are not too heavy to get out of a slump, then yes, I would recommend this for you. Next up, we have Follow Me to Ground by Sue Rainsford. This is one of my favorite books of all time, and I just don't talk about it enough. We are following a young woman whose name I believe is Ada, and her father, and they're actually not human beings, but they are tolerated because they have an uncanny knack for healing people. Essentially, people come to them, Ada will crack their bodies open while they are unconscious and kind of go in and physically fix whatever is wrong with them. This is a really great book if you want representation for earth magic. As somebody who is very spiritually connected to the earth, this book meant a lot. I listened to it on audio, and it is one of the most fabulous, fantastic, atmospheric audiobooks that you will ever read in your life. This is a great book recommendation for fall. And if you want more of my fall book recommendations, I just uploaded a video on my Patreon where I give my favorite autumnal book recs. So that is going to be linked down below. It is available to the second and the third tier patrons, and it is $6 to join. So if you're interested in that, definitely check it out. One of the things that I loved about this book is that Ada is a twisted narrator, and I absolutely love narrators that are unhinged. A really good example is Joe Goldberg from You, even though that took a turn. This novel has been described as both gorgeous and unsettling, and I could not think of a better description for it. You're following her as she becomes very obsessed with this young man in her town, and she's like having a sexual awakening for the first time, gets very, very possessive of him. And also, like, it's important to note that this girl is very strong. She is very powerful. I feel like it's a book that is best if you go in knowing very little, but it is weird. And if you like weird, you're gonna like this book. And the reason that this put me into a reading slump is because I was left thinking about her and her desires and her cognitive distortions and her obsession, and I wanted another book with that same vibe. I wanted to feel that hazy, unsettling feeling, specifically with a book that is like set in the woods and really connected to the earth. And because this book is so absolutely unique, I couldn't have that. Again, this was another one of those books that once I finished it, I wanted to start it over immediately. Now, if you're looking for a book that is similar to this, a really good recommendation would be Earth Eater by Dolores Reyes. I think Reyes is her last name. The audiobook for that is also phenomenal, and it is a short little thing just like this one. Why? 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 Tell me why. I don't even want to talk about this. This was one of my most highly anticipated releases for last year. And you know what? Hope isn't for everyone. Nothing But Blackened Teeth is a little horror novel about these friends who are coming together, I think the night before one of them gets married. And they're telling ghost stories, and they're in this like really beautiful old home. and they find out that the home is haunted and they start getting haunted by an entity that resides within the home. I hated it. The author did this thing where you could tell that she was using a thesaurus. I just couldn't stand it. The characters were archetypal and they followed archetypes that I don't particularly care for, as well as they had like very toxic dynamics between them that felt narrow and overdone, dynamics that we've seen time and time again without adding anything new. Now, the horror in this book was pretty cool, but the writing was not for me. It was giving where was the editor. And that's all I'm gonna say about this book. I feel like it's very clear why this put me in a reading slump. Next up we have How Beautiful We Were, one of my favorite books of all time by Mbolo Boy. If you followed me at all last year, you will know that I was basically jumping on everybody's backs trying to get them to read this. And I am so grateful for those of you who have commented and said that you read this because of me. It meant a whole hell of a lot because this novel needs to be everywhere. We are following the residents of a fictional village called Kasawa, and for generations this American corporation called Paxton has been drilling into their land, which has caused the land to become poisoned, the water supply to become poisoned. People are being born with birth defects. They are no longer able to grow their crops. And we are just following the various perspectives of people in this village. While every single month the company sends out representatives saying, hey, we're gonna stop drilling next month, just to kind of placate the people. These people, after years and years of arguing with each other because they're anti-violent, decide to use violence to fight back. This is a book that I want all Westerners to read. I think it is really, really important. The issues reflected in this book are so important, and it talks about where the gas that we put in our cars comes from specifically, and the communities outside of the United States that are harmed by it the most. But the reason that I could not read another book after this was because I was so damn depressed. You come to love each and every person in this village. It's about how gorgeous and vibrant and happy this community was before the drilling started. You watch not only the customs and culture of these people crumble, but the people themselves, the children, the adults, the rituals, the traditions, and it was heartbreaking. And after that, I just was like reevaluating everything about my life. I didn't want to read anything else. I couldn't. Next up, we have one of my favorite books, After the Flood by Cassandra Montague. I have recommended this book to anybody who would listen for several years, and I just read a comment from one of you, the first person ever, who was like, I actually hated this book, it was boring. Shine bright like a diamond. But with the exception of that person, I have had dozens of people read this book and they all said that it was absolutely fucking phenomenal. In After the Flood, the world has been destroyed by terrible rains and floods. This mother had one of her children taken from her by her husband, took the child and fled. And so she decides to track this husband and her child down at all costs. She manipulates her way onto this ship where we're following a community of people that have found their own way of life and their own way of surviving. And she manipulates them into going into pirate-infested waters in order to actually rescue her kid. But the whole time, these people have no idea that they're heading into pirate territory. And despite all of this, she is putting the current child that she has in danger to rescue her eldest kid. So she's putting her kid in danger as well as this whole community that lives on a ship. And throughout this journey, she's falling in love not only with one of the crew members, but with the people on the ship as well. And it is one of the best books that you can read in terms of moral ambiguity. But on top of that, just like Hamnet, this writing was gorgeous. It was gorgeous, and it talks so much about grief and pain and suffering, and I could not put it down. I absolutely could not put it down. This is a book that made me cry, and it is very rare that I actually will cry from reading a book. I knew it was sometimes easier to love ghosts than the people who were around you. Ghosts could be perfect, frozen beyond time, beyond reality, the crystal form they'd never been before, the person you needed them to be. Maybe it was because I loved her enough to sit with her, her grief like a third person in the room, palpable, with a shape of its own, a shape that I knew would change over time, evolving, as only grief could. One of the things that really got me about the book and the reason why I didn't want to read anything after it was it talks about parental abandonment and loss of a parent, which I make a hell of a lot of fucking jokes about how my first father walked out on the family, because at this point I just find it hilarious. At the time that I read that book, which I think was like 2019, I was still healing from that trauma. It spoke to the child in me that still hadn't let go of it, and so I couldn't read anything after it. And the final book that I have that put me in a reading slump is The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. This is a book where if you've been on my channel for 2 seconds, you will know that I love it. I have been recommending this book since 2019. It is phenomenal. It is queer. It is a space opera. It is male as well as female. It features time travel. It features corrupt corporations. It has issues of morality. It has strong female characters. It has sensitive male characters. The world building is fantastic. It has morally gray and immoral characters. It's phenomenal. Essentially, The Vanished Birds is about Captain Nia, a woman that traverses space and time itself, and she ends up being put in charge of this little boy who basically crash lands on another planet, and this corporation is paying her an obscene amount of money to recover this little boy. And on this journey, she learns that this boy is incredibly dangerous, so her crew is not happy and is trying to kill him. But also she learns that she loves the shit out of this little boy and decides to protect him. I've been filming for over 50 minutes, so I'm going to wrap this video up just by saying it is one of the most beautifully written books that I've ever read. The way that it talks about love across space and time was haunting. There's nothing that I can say about this book that I haven't already, but if you like Small Way to a Long Angry Planet, but you want Small Way to a Long Angry Planet with a little bit more serious of a tone without all of that comedy. This book does have funny moments, but it definitely takes itself more seriously than Long Way does. If you like Firefly, if any of that's resonating with you, this is a book that you're going to want to read. And those are the 14 books, the good and the bad, that put me into a reading slump. Again, the original creative ways to get out of a reading slump video is going to be linked down below, as well as the information on my Patreon. It is only $3 to join. Definitely check it out. We do fun stuff over there. This month's video was fall book recommendations, and last month's video was me giving all of the details and information on the upcoming book that I am writing. Until next time, stay safe, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and I can't wait to see you in my next one.